everybody's scrambling for power, right?
Yeah.
Like there's all these long lines of people waiting to get hooked up, like getting power, getting that infrastructure developed to deliver that much power to the miners. It's like we've got 300 exahash worth of latent electrical infrastructure. Let's go take it over. The benefits are more secure network and a hyper decentralized network.
Zach,
Yeah.
welcome. Welcome back to the show. Even though this is the first time for the audience, this is the second time for us. And I think there's a lot more depth the second time around, because I feel like we got to know each other in our
Yeah.
test run of an episode in which we lost the episode, or we lost enough of it that we're gonna have to do this over again. But we're gonna see how round
Painful.
two goes, right? We're gonna
Let's do
run
it.
this back. All right,
Let's
man,
do it.
dude, welcome to the show. Well,
Let's go,
officially.
man. Another beautiful day in the peaceful revolution.
Hell yeah. It sucks that I'm not going to get to have the revelation that you were part of um oh god, the company. The
Outlet.
sock. Outlet.
Yep,
Thank
outlet.
you. Thank you. Brain fart. On the show, because that was crazy to me, was just finding out that your background was there. I had no idea. And that your vision for this, because I was just interested. The reason I had you on is just because I was interested in designing these little DIY products for making mining easier for people. Like
Hmm.
that just was exciting to me. The idea of making it, like, I had a pretty complex setup and plugging some N30s into my house to, heat the house.
Right.
Um, it wasn't super complex, but it was enough that I just know normal people aren't going to do that. Even Bitcoin enthusiasts might feel intimidated. I mean, I kind of was. And so the idea of making that simpler, of opening this kind of DIY market to that, was really exciting to me. But then, as we discovered live in our lost recording, is that this vision is actually a whole hell of a lot bigger and more complete than I had thought. So it was absolutely crucial that we have you back on and we make sure that we go through this entire vision. So that, because I think this is a huge deal. I think this is awesome. So welcome, welcome officially, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me back on and being willing to do this again. The vision is big, it's exciting, and I want to get the word out. So I really appreciate you being willing to go through this again. And while you won't necessarily have the revelation, or we won't have the revelatory component in this recording, I think it'll still be there for the audience. So let's
Hell yeah.
do it.
All right. So let's start with the obvious. Let's start with your background, a little bit of how you found your way to Bitcoin, and then what you did before. Let's talk about Owlet and kind of your history and product design and bringing stuff to market.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So I am originally from a small town in Idaho. Grew up on a farm, youngest of eight. So I come from a big family. My siblings would tell you I'm the spoiled one, but I would detest that. Um, yeah, I went to college at BYU in Provo, Utah, where I studied electrical engineering with an emphasis in hardware and embedded systems. And man, I loved that that major. Really, even before I was in my first introductory electrical engineering class, I was tinkering around with circuits. I was just like a big kid with Legos, with tech Legos, and found myself working for a bunch of different entrepreneurs, just designing circuits for them and getting paid, really good hourly wage for a college student that hadn't even been accepted to the electrical engineering program yet. But I just loved it and just started tinkering with these circuits and got into the program. Um, while I was going to school, I uh, got involved with a startup. I actually was involved in several startups, but got involved with one in a big way that kind of caused me to pull out of all the other startups I was in. And I guess little background leading into Owlet. I married young. I had my first child pretty young, and she was 3 months old one night when she got really sick and congested, and my wife and I were up all night just worried sick about her. Um, I get up the next morning to go to school and just randomly bump into a friend of mine that was a chemical engineer. Bumped into him in the electrical engineering shop, clumsily trying to put this circuit together. And I asked him, what are you, a chemical engineer, doing here in the electrical engineering shop? And he explained to me the idea for this little smart sock that would go on a baby's foot and detect heart rate and oxygen levels. And at the time he pitched it to me as he actually had a couple of cousins that were recently born premature, two twins that were born prematurely, and saw that his aunt was worried sick all night long. So he's like, I got to go solve this problem. There's got to be some technology out there. So he
Yeah.
started trying to put this product together. And as he's explaining this to me in the electrical engineering shop, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I had just had this experience the night before of being worried sick about my 3-month-old.
Yeah.
And
So it was
I was
literally the next day.
literally the next day, right?
Wow. Talk
I
about
had,
talk about the recipe, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
I had literally just lived through the pain that he was trying to solve. So it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty deep into a couple other startups. One was a fire prevention device that went on Shark Tank. Another one was an autopilot system for drones that we eventually sold that company. But I was pretty deep in these other startups, and so with that experience of having my 3-month-old and then randomly bumping into my friend on campus and having him explain this to me, like I got goosebumps while he was explaining it to me. I was like, I've got to do whatever it takes to get involved in this company. So I joined this little college startup as the first electrical engineer, um, and started building this circuit, started building this product really, and we went through the whole thing, did our own like Kickstarter campaign, went through a hardware accelerator program, grew the company from a handful of employees to eventually over the course of 9 years, grew it to a couple hundred employees, taking the company public at a $1.4 billion valuation. And I think most importantly, um, providing peace of mind to over 1.5 million customers, eventually selling, in those first 9 years, eventually selling over 1.5 million units. And it got to the point in this company where, we had distributed enough product and we were monitoring enough babies on a nightly basis that we were getting uh, multiple stories a day of how the owlet had helped parents save their baby's life. Right? They'd wake up in the middle of the night and get a notification that. And I guess I should explain the product a little bit more. So we designed this smart sock that uses pulse oximetry. It's that little red light they put on your finger when you go to the doctor, and it can read heart rate and oxygen. Well,
Mm-hmm.
up until that time, there were no pulse oximeters that were appropriate for monitoring in the nursery or in the home. There are all these big, expensive hospital boxes that have cables going to them that present a strangulation hazard for baby.
Yeah.
They have so many false alarms that most parents that end up using them for medical reasons on their baby end up just not using them. Like they turn them off because they false alarm so much.
Just a
So
nightmare, yeah.
so we set out to build our own pulse oximeter specifically designed for babies to work well on babies and to be appropriate for monitoring in the home. Um, and we would get, and we did that. We accomplished that. We took this hospital grade technology. We were able to reduce the cost down to about a tenth of what it is in to buy a hospital one. It's battery powered, no wires, just this comfortable little sock that goes on baby's foot and reads their heart rate and oxygen levels, and then notifies parents if the oxygen gets too low, so like baby stops breathing, or just for some reason their oxygen is out of normal ranges, or if their heart rate is out of normal ranges. So by the uh, by the time we're on 1.5 million customers, or by the time we'd sold 1.5 million units, we were getting multiple stories a day of how a really common case is something known as single ventricular tachycardia, where a baby has a heart defect that causes their heart to beat too fast and it can't self-regulate back down. And this is actually a condition that goes undiagnosed all the time. And so babies will have this SVT condition, and their heart rate will beat super fast, and until it just can't beat anymore, like kind of peters itself out, and baby passes away silently. And a lot of times you just don't know. And so we're on hundreds of thousands of babies every night, and we're seeing all these different episodes of it's not a super common medical condition, but it's common enough that when you're on hundreds of thousands of babies, you're seeing multiple episodes a night. And so parents would get these stories of last night I kept getting a high heart rate. I went in and tried to put my fingers there, listen to my baby's heart rate, and it was just humming away. So I took them into the hospital, and sure enough, they had SVT, and the hospital had to intervene and do some medical intervention to save baby's life. So we were getting tons of stories like that. It was super rewarding and super fun.
How does that when you get a message like that, when you get an email like that, like how does that make you feel?
It was, I mean, it was,
Like I'm having a hard time. right now, just knowing that, like, Jesus Christ, I don't know, being a dad,
Yeah,
it changes your perspective on things.
we would. I mean, it was building a hardware startup is to say it's hard is an understatement. I mean, we had this
Yeah.
huge, what I like to call true full stack technology, everything from, the actual electronics and mechanical engineering design, industrial design, soft goods, like all of the physical product that has to interface with a baby's foot that quadruples in size in the first year, right? We had all these crazy hardware constraints. And then we also, on top of that, we have the firmware, we have the back end, we have the mobile device, like we have Internet of Things or internet connectivity. Like it was a huge true full stack. And the reason I share that is just to say it's really hard to build true full stack companies, and it required an incredible amount of work from really talented people. I mean, I probably averaged 80 to 90 hours a week for 9 years working at that startup. And so
Jesus.
when you ask how does it make you feel when you get those stories, it made all the struggle so worth it. And it was such a rewarding opportunity to be involved in. Um, I remember that there's kind of a dark side to that as well, though, in that it because it's so motivating to get those stories, it pushes you harder and further, and
Yeah.
maybe
Get lost
faster
in it.
than is healthy for you and your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember about 6 years ago, there was this time when we had shipped about 1,000 units, maybe a few more, and it was finally feeling like, hey, we're gonna make it. Like we got product on the market, we're getting a handle on this.
Mm-hmm.
And my co-founder, we had gotten our first few stories, and my co-founder went and printed off each of these stories and hung them up on the wall near the entrance of our office. And late one night, it was like 9:30. I was the last one in the office, and I wasn't aware that he had taped these up on the wall. I hadn't seen them yet, and I'm leaving the office, and on my way out, I'd noticed, oh, there's these, what are these? And I start reading these stories, and by the end of reading those stories, I was bawling, like just being exposed to those life-saving
I don't know
stories
how
for
you
the first
don't,
time.
man. I don't know how you wouldn't.
And I remember having a distinct impression after reading those, like, I better enjoy this while it lasts because like I'll never have another opportunity like this
Yeah.
to an opportunity for good in the world. And that was extremely motivating and exciting during those initial years. Near the end of my time at Owlet, it actually kind of became haunting, right? Because it was like I'm never going to find an opportunity like this to do this much good in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of started to scare me. Um, and then
That
and then
you've
I
done
guess,
your most important work.
yeah, is it all downhill from here? Is it
Yeah,
all
yeah.
like just never going to find anything as rewarding? But and this kind of transitions into my Bitcoin journey. But um, when I fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and discovered this mantra of fix the money, fix the world, I started to realize that this has potential for orders of magnitudes more good in the world if we can indeed fix the money and fix the world, right? All the malaise that's caused in the world by a fiat standard. If we can fix the money and fix the world and solve all, I think as Michael Saylor says, about half the problems in the world are caused by a fiat standard, and it just got me so excited again to be involved in something as arguably as meaningful or more meaningful as how I was involved at Outlet.
Yeah.
Um,
And to think that the scale could be not only that much greater, but at such a low level that like there wouldn't even necessarily be a direct story, but you're talking about attacking not one specific problem in one area, but the underlying incentives that lead to so many different problems in
yeah,
so many different areas so that you can take like I mean the literal trillions of dollars in resources that are just misallocated towards wasteful things that would be directed back to products like the outlet, products that are legitimate solutions to legitimate problems and provide real value in the economy because we're just being flooded with this misinformation, with this economic delusional uh, communication layer, so to speak,
yeah.
that's just lying to us about what's worth it. And so we're just depleting. We're doing nothing but depleting resources, um, and like it really is crazy to think that there could be I mean, I can see that kind of dilemma, or that reaching that point of like, holy crap, like, I've done, this is by far the most important thing that I could do, and then to realize just
How big it can be.
how big it can be, and how big of a difference you can make.
Yeah.
Like, to think that if you made, I still think, and we haven't even gotten into it yet, but the thing that you have switched to, the thing that you're building now, like the idea of either enabling Bitcoin to survive or preventing the very nature of one of its one of the most important attacks against it. Basically, ensuring that it just never really is even an avenue for a large adversary is crazy to think about. You know,
Yeah.
is that just us, just you, just a small group of people, Bitcoiners dedicated to this, could have an extraordinarily meaningful impact on that outcome, or that path into the future, so to speak.
Yeah. And hopefully usher in a secure hyper Bitcoinized future, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yep.
on that, let's start unpacking. So when did you discover Bitcoin, and how did how did your history with Outlet kind of inform the
Yeah.
direction that you took and the perspective that you took on Bitcoin?
Yeah. So sadly for me, I was first exposed to Bitcoin in 2013 and I just wrote it off. I was actually, I was on a red eye flight with my co-founders. We were going to our first or second board meeting in New York. We were still small enough to where we had to go meet our investors at their office for the board meeting. They wouldn't come to us. And
Mm-hmm.
so we do these red eye flights, and we're on this red eye flight from Salt Lake City to New York. And we get off the flight, and my co-founder comes up to me all excited, and he's like, "Dude, I got to tell you about this thing called Bitcoin." So he had sat next to this Bitcoin OG that talked to him the entire red eye flight about Bitcoin. And I guess, I unfortunately didn't get to sit next to that OG. I was in the back of the plane sleeping. And I guess me being the
Missed
CTO,
opportunities.
missed
There's like, come on,
opportunity.
man, let's switch seats.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess me being the CTO, my co-founder just thought, anything techie, Zach's got to know about it.
He'll figure it out. He knows this. He's got
So
this
he
stuff.
he comes up to me all excited about Bitcoin and tries to start explaining it to me. He had never been exposed to it up to that point. Starts explaining it to me, and just doesn't do a great job. I mean, how well can you expect him to do?
Of course.
Trying to take it all in on a red eye flight.
One
He
hour
doesn't do a
down the
great job.
rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, and so he and he told me all about it. I could tell he was excited. And my first two thoughts were, one, I don't have time for this, right? I was doing 80 to 100 hours a week regularly. I don't have time for this. And the second one was, this sounds suspicious, like some government co-opted surveillance technology that they're trying to
Yeah.
push on the people.
CIA made this shit absolutely 100%. There's no
Yeah.
way.
So I was like, yeah, no
Satoshi
thanks.
Nakamoto.
So I wrote it off. It wasn't until probably 2018 or so that I started it going into the crypto casinos and, oh, can I buy a little bit here? Just speculative stuff, right?
Sure.
It
Yeah.
wasn't until after Owlet had gone public. So Owlet went public in July of 2021. I stayed on and active for another 6 months, and then due to a number of circumstances, and I'll get into some of the details on one of them, but due to a number of circumstances, at the start of 2022, I decided it was time to go on sabbatical and make up for some long lost time with my family. Um, I told you we started Owlet with my first child when she was 3 months. Fast forward 9 years, and now I've got three kids and have a lot of long lost time to make up. So I decided, hey, it's time to go on sabbatical. And once on sabbatical, um, I found the time to start listening to some Bitcoin podcasts. I had picked up the Bitcoin Standard, started reading the Bitcoin Standard. Loved that book. Actually, ended up buying it for all seven of my siblings for Christmas and made them all read it. Um, so between the Bitcoin Standard and the Michael Saylor, Robert Breedlove podcast series, I fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and started to understand Bitcoin for what it truly was, right? Not just number go up speculative crypto or casino chips, but that it was like fix the money, fix the world. It was a tool to fix the world. And so that's in early 2020. So or sorry, that was in not early 2020. That was in 2022. Um, that I really fell down the Bitcoin rabbit
That's
hole
right. I
in.
forgot. You're down the rabbit hole is very, very recent. I forgot about that.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
recent.
Yeah.
So, kind of tying back to what I was talking about earlier about identifying this opportunity, like, hey, here's a chance for me to do meaningful work similar to what I was doing at Outlet, or as meaningful or more meaningful than what I was doing at Outlet. And so I knew I wanted to be involved in Bitcoin. I knew I wanted to somehow contribute in some way. And from my perspective at the time, it seemed like all of the potential job openings were in um, sales or software development. And while, being the CTO at Owlet, I had an opportunity to touch every part of the tech stack. I can do the software development, I can do mobile app development, but my passion and strength is in hardware and embedded systems. And so I was feeling a little bummed, like, man, I really want to find a way to contribute here to Bitcoin, but I don't see anything that like really fits my skill set. And I remember at the time I had heard Michael Saylor say at one point, someone asked him a question about, hey, what do you think about mining Bitcoin? And he kind of gave a pretty high level answer of like, hey, unless you have, the public miners are so big now, unless you have some unique advantage, Bitcoin mining probably isn't for you. And so I kind of wrote it off. But then as I immersed myself in the space and I came across the pleb miner movement and was just blown away by the level of passion and dedication in the pleb miner community.
Man, they go
And
hard. They don't fuck
yeah,
around.
I mean, it's crazy. And here I'm seeing people like Tech Engineer, um, and yourself, right, that are going and like putting holes in their wall, running their own 220, drilling holes in their ventilation or their HVAC system to try to get these Bitcoin miners in their homes, right? They're arguably risking life and limb to install hash rate in their home and reuse the heat.
Hmm.
And I was just like, man, this is genius. I love this. I love this idea that we can reuse that heat, and once you reuse the heat, like that's your competitive advantage against the competition out there, right? And so as I'm coming into this space, I'm like, okay, this is a really cool opportunity to be involved with, or there's a really cool way to contribute. Um, I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe to back up, another thing that was going on here, and sorry, I know I've talked about Owlet a lot already, but I think this is a really salient point. Um, the last 6 months of my involvement at Owlet, so Owlet went public in July of 2021. In October of 2021, we received a public warning letter from the FDA telling us that we needed to stop selling our product immediately. Now, this blindsided us, as you can imagine, but a lot of the backstory that people don't know about Owlet is that 6 years prior to receiving that public letter, we had submitted an application to the FDA for medical device clearance. And that application was desk rejected, meaning they took one look at it and said, nope. So we jumped on a call with Bakul Patel, the director of digital health at the FDA at the time.
Hmm.
And we asked him, hey, why was this desk rejected? And he's told us on that call, well, I desk rejected it because I don't think this is a medical device. Pulse oximetry is an interesting technology. It's a little bit of a nuanced technology where you have consumer device pulse oximeters and you have medical device pulse oximeters. And so there's
Okay.
definitely a gray zone there. And so Bakul Patel was telling us, hey, as long as you guys, you know, watch your claims and don't overclaim what your product is and isn't, as long as you watch those claims, I don't think this is a medical device. And we said, oh, that's fantastic news. Can we get that in writing? And he
Yeah.
said, no, the FDA doesn't, we don't give guarantees like that in writing. But what you can do is you can take minutes of this
We don't
call.
stand behind our statements to anybody. Why
I
would we
forget the
do that?
I forget the technical term that they have for it, but essentially they don't want to tie their hands in the future should they change their mind, right? But he said,
Of
but
course.
what you can do is you can take minutes of this
It would
call.
be awful to have reliable, consistent
Yeah, I know, right?
regulatory boundaries, right?
So he said take minutes of this call and send them over to me. I'll sign the minutes, and so that's what we did 6 years ago. After that, every 6 to 12 months, the FDA would come around, just be like, hey, we don't like this claim you're making. Go change this claim, or we think you need to do this. So we'd do it. We'd go change the claim, and then they'd go away, and we wouldn't hear from them again for another 12 months or so. So it was a complete surprise to us when, in October of 2021, we get blindsided with this public warning letter. And essentially, a public warning letter says the FDA is going out to the world and posting this letter on their website and saying, this company needs to stop this activity, and if they don't, we will refer them to the Department of Justice for arraignment. Right. And so it's like, as young founders of this company, like somewhat naive, we're like, oh wow. So at that time we were on track to do about $120 million of sales that year, in annual
Hmm.
sales. We had just gone public at 1.4 billion. So we're not a huge company, but we're not like some small company. The
Yeah,
FDA comes in, shuts us down. We have absolutely no recourse. Um, we tried everything. We contacted our senators. We contacted a bunch of different state reps from, we had market data on where our devices were really popular. We went and contacted senators and
hmm
representatives for those states. We we contacted, we had a petition that started that got several 100,000 signatures from parents that wanted to use the device. Like, we tried everything and there
pretty
was
sure I
no
signed that
recourse.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
This show is brought to you by the Cold Card hardware wallet. My favorite setup, which I know I talk about a lot, is the Nunchuck wallet on mobile that just connects directly to or just talks NFC whenever I need to sign. The Nunchuck does not hold my keys. It is securely on my Cold Card, not connected to the internet, not vulnerable to a phishing email or any malware or anything like that. If I ever need to send a transaction, I just create the transaction on my Nunchuck wallet, and I tap it to my Cold Card, I hit sign, I tap it again, and then off it goes. There is no easier interface and way of interacting that grants a higher level of security, in my opinion, than that right there. It's genuinely incredible to me that we even have this capability in the Bitcoin space. And CoinKite has just made an entire suite of fascinating security and just fun Bitcoin devices and hardware products, like the block clock. Just connect it to your node and have it show the Bitcoin price, have it show the block height, just right there on your desk in this really cool package. If you haven't checked out what they have to offer, you definitely need to. And when you go over there, do not forget that I have a 9% discount code. Bitcoin Audible, all one word, gets you 9% off. And you can go through the link in the show notes or just remember the discount code, which is not hard. It's just the name of the show. You can go through the link in the show notes to go right there, or just go to the store, browse around, see what you want, get yourself a solid hardware wallet, experience the tap to send with a Cold Card hardware wallet. It's just kind of magical. And get notified for the Q1. I'm really stoked about my Cypherpunk BlackBerry, the new model that's going to be coming out. So check that out as well. Yeah, don't forget, 9% off. The link is right in the show notes. Go check them out. Yeah, because just the thing that I mentioned, in the last time or whatever, is that and just for the audience, is I had been looking at, like, my wife was pregnant during this, so that was a big thing. I had seen the owlet, like, I don't know, a year earlier or something like that, and I thought it was such a cool idea. And actually, I think she saw it and then she showed it to me, and I was immediately like, as soon as we were trying to have a kid, I was like, oh, we're gonna have one of these. This is gonna be great. I know, like, my wife is gonna be super stressed, and this is gonna help her sleep, and all that stuff. And the day, like, somehow it just came across my Twitter feed, just because I don't know, I follow a whole lot of people who hate the government, so whenever they make a stupid decision, it shows up in my feed. So it showed up almost immediately, and I immediately was like, oh my God, and I wanted to share it with my wife, but then I was like, wait a second, and I immediately went on eBay and just rush bought one of the ones that was just available at the time, because I was like, I have no idea how long it's going to be before one of these comes up. I have got to get a used one or a resale now, or I might lose the opportunity. And so I bought one, and then it was a Christmas present, so we didn't get to share our utter endless frustration with the stupidity of government until Christmas. But then we went through like a 2-hour conversation of, like, this is insane, this is so stupid, the evils of the great service that they have provided, because they didn't fit into some regulatory box, or somebody changed their mind, now years later, after the product has already been on the market or whatever, because what? Because too many babies' lives were saved? Like, what could the possible downside of having a sock that helped, like, even if it was a complete failure, like, even if it didn't work, who cares? Like what possible, I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
such a frustrating thing. It's such a frustrating thing,
yeah.
And
Believe me, I felt the frustration. It still gets me, it gets me so frustrated just reliving it. But so we get this letter and we're forced to stop selling our product, right? Again,
mhm.
we're a pretty sizable company. We have a huge customer base. We're forced to stop selling it, and it cost us about $75 million and 9 months to kind of justify or right the situation. And
So
even to this
essentially
day,
all of your revenue, like everything that has come in is now built around fighting this invisible thing that is
arbitrary, right?
that's
Seemingly arbitrary decision.
completely arbitrary, and that you have no clear recourse for, and that is wasting critical resources for a product that people are literally writing in and saying, this saved my baby's life. And they have put that on hold. They have frozen that in time and stolen all of the resources to go to just pleasing somebody who decides that they should be the gatekeeper as to whether or not you can do this.
Whether or not you as a customer
So
are
frustrating.
educated enough to buy a
Ah,
product, right, to give you peace of mind with your baby. And you talk about wasted resources. So connecting some of the
oh,
dots here,
God.
when this happened, I had a $25 million R&D budget. As the CTO and running the ops of the CTO, I had a team of about a couple dozen scientists and engineers and developers that we were working on some really cool life-saving technology that we were preparing to take out to the world, right? And I can't share the details on that because it's still at Owla in the backlog or on the back burner. But
Okay, yeah.
we had to take this $25 million budget and these awesome projects. We had to ice the projects and dedicate that $25 million R&D budget, that was dedicated to
To
developing and discovering new life-saving
screaming at
technologies,
regulators.
to instead go and fund our legal fees, right? And
Oh, my
so
God.
it was a nightmare. But why do I share that story? There's a Bitcoin podcast. Why am I sharing this
Yeah.
story? Because that was extremely formative. That living through that experience was extremely formative and gave me what I think is an incredible perspective into understanding the Bitcoin mining risk vector. I'll say a significant Bitcoin mining risk vector, right? So this is back in late 2021, early 2022 that I'm on this journey. And at that time, I just kept seeing article after article of all this FUD about Bitcoin mining and how it's going to boil the oceans, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
it uses more, it's going to eclipse the entire annual consumption or the global electric consumption. And so I'm sitting here thinking,
So
wow,
stupid.
if some centralized regulatory body can come in and just like that shut down Outlet with no recourse, like Outlet not having any recourse, how easy is it for a regulatory body like the EPA to come into all the large publicly traded mining companies and shut them down
Say
and
you're
just
done.
say Bitcoin mining is outlawed, but
And as
because
if
of
as anybody could possibly believe that they had the restraint to think that like they didn't have the right to do that.
right,
It's like, no, you kidding me? The
they'll come
EPA?
they'll
Man.
come in and cite some article and some code from some bureaucratic body, right, and say, yeah, you got to shut down. And so I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I have the words of Michael Saylor saying, yeah, Bitcoin mining probably isn't for you unless you have some strategic advantage. And I have the experience of living through this regulatory nightmare as I'm kind of navigating my way or putting my fillers out there for how to get involved in Bitcoin. And suddenly it clicks, right? Oh, and the other element is seeing the pleb miner passion. And
Hmm.
suddenly it clicks um, that we've got to hyper decentralize the Bitcoin mining network. And as I had this epiphany of like, okay, this has got to happen. We've got to protect against this attack vector. If we hyper decentralize the Bitcoin mining network to the point where it's geographically and legal entity wise, it is hyper decentralized, right? So it becomes way too politically expensive for the government to come in and shut down, a million plus different locations, a million plus different legal entities. When it's a handful of publicly traded companies with maybe a few dozen different large mega mining sites, it's pretty easy to go shut those down and it's not politically expensive. Um,
Yeah.
so I had this epiphany like we have to hyper decentralize Bitcoin mining. Um, and as I'm doing my research, I see we are on a trajectory of hyper centralized Bitcoin mining. Right? It started out decentralized when people were mining on their computers, but due to the free market forces and large hardware equipment manufacturers and large publicly traded miners, we have become more and more and more centralized. We're on this, what I would argue is an extremely dangerous trajectory.
Yeah. The economies of scale works against us. Now, one thing I would say is that despite the fact that the kind of data center, like large mining uh, operations have overwhelmingly become the largest part of it. I've actually been interested or encouraged in kind of the element of mining pools and how the Stratum V2 has continued to develop, and we've started to see some smaller mining pools that are catching steam that are are putting that into use, like into operation. I think there's a lot of forces at work for people like you and a lot of people with the same mindset that are starting to put the pieces together to undo this, or
Yeah.
to kind of reverse course, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm super excited and encouraged by what I'm seeing. The response has been slow. It's taken us a little while to kind of mount resistance to centralization, but I'm
Hmm.
so encouraged by what I've seen just in the last 3 to 6 months. Um, so as I'm on this journey and looking at how do I get involved, like I came across this realization that we have to hyper decentralize, and also this realization that there's this trajectory of more and more centralization. How do we how do we hyper decentralize? Again, we're working against economies of scale. We're working against the incumbent free market forces that have led us to this centralized, large public miners. How do we counter that? And as I'm diving in here and thinking about this, I'm coming across like a lot of this, is I'm kind of building off the shoulders of giants of people that have already been in this space trying to solve this problem. You have companies like FutureBit, awesome company, awesome ethos, that are trying to hyper decentralize. There are
Are
several
they the
other
ones
companies.
that have the little black box that's kind of like desktop
Yeah, yeah, the
miners?
Apollo miner.
I almost bought one of those like on point at a Bitcoin conference once. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's not a
Yeah,
lot of hash power, but damn, that's really cool. I would love to have
there's
that on my desk.
there's some great podcasts with John, the CEO of FutureBit. I mean, just love his ethos, love the vision that he has, and support that 100%. There's several other companies that are trying to do this, right? But as I'm a newcomer in this space and on the outside looking in, so to speak, I'm sitting here saying, but why have we failed to stem the flow or stem the trajectory, right? To change the trajectory
Hmm.
towards more decentralization, like something isn't adding up. And as I dove into it, I came up with this hypothesis that I'm working feverishly to try to prove out in the coming months. But if you can the hypothesis is that we can change the trajectory towards centralization from decentralization, or sorry, we can change the trajectory from centralization to decentralization if we can empower pleb miner passion to harness free market forces and break into the pre-coiner market. I want to spend a little time unpacking that. So if you look at current decentralized efforts right now, they have not been successful in stemming the trajectory or changing the trajectory from centralized to decentralized. And I would argue it's because we're fighting against those free market forces, right? Um, not to diminish or belittle any products or companies out there that are trying to decentralize, but the reality is
They all
when
suck and
when
they
you're
failed. No,
when you're selling, I don't know that they all suck, but when you're selling a
I'm
product
joking.
that's $70 to $140 a terahash, there's various different
Hmm.
miners out there for that. For example, Heatbit. If I go buy the
Hmm.
first version Heatbit, like cool, it's an awesome concept of let's put a space heater in every home, until you start diving into the unit economics and the numbers, right? This thing
Yeah,
costs
yeah.
140. The version one costs $140 a terahash. Now
Hmm.
version two, they've made great strides, but it's still $70 a terahash. Like there is nobody that's
Yeah,
going to buy that isn't a Bitcoin maxi. Like the only way you're dropping $70 a terahash is if you're a Bitcoin maxi that's 100% convinced that Bitcoin's going to $1 million, right?
yeah.
Because then you could justify that expense. But that's the problem: is how many Bitcoin maxis are out there? There aren't that many Bitcoin maxis. The market, another way of saying it is, the potential market or the market size for selling that product is incredibly small, right? So going back to this, so if we want to harness free market forces, we have to have a way to, well, I guess let me put it this way. If we want to grow the size of that market, we have to come up with a product and a solution that makes sense to pre-coiners, because the pre-coiner market, and a pre-coiner, just to define that, is anyone that maybe doesn't know about Bitcoin or is only marginally aware of Bitcoin, right? They're not 100% bought in. In order to break into that market, we have to develop a product and a strategy that makes it make economical sense for them. And $70 a terahash just doesn't make economical sense for anybody.
Yeah.
And so going back to this hypothesis, can we change the trajectory from centralized to hyper decentralized by empowering pleb miner passion to harness free market forces and break into the pleb miner, or sorry, break into the pre-coiner market? So let's unpack that a little. Pleb miner passion, we've already talked about it a little bit, right? You have these guys that are hashing out their houses with, they're heating their homes with hash. And if, I've talked to several of these guys where they get really excited and passionate about this project. They go and they fulfill all of their home's heating needs with Bitcoin miners, and they do all this incredible work, and then they'll get to the end of this project and they lament the fact now it's boring. Like they want to do more, but they just can't put any more hash rate in their house, right? Because they're now opening their windows in the middle of winter.
It's already too hot.
Yeah, right. So they get all this passion, they do this big project, and then once they hash out their home, there's no outlet for that passion, right? But there's that passion is still there. It's contained within the four walls of their home. So can we empower that passion and unleash that passion beyond the four walls of the home? So that's the first aspect of this hypothesis. Second aspect of the hypothesis we've already kind of touched on as well. Can we use free market forces? Now, market participants in a normal functioning society that's not corrupt by fiat standard, corrupt beyond repair, which I don't know that we're there yet, but in normal market actors will do what's economically expedient for them, right? And buying a $70 per terahash machine just isn't economically expedient.
Yeah.
So can we develop a product that makes where the unit economics work out and it just makes sense for free market actors, or where free market actors are economically incentivized to use or to buy one of these products? And then if we can make that work, then we can break into the pre-coiner market, and that market is thousands of times bigger. So in order for us to break into that pre-coiner market, I think three things have to be true. One, we have to have a solution that is non-intrusive. So when I say non-intrusive, if anyone's tried to run a Bitcoin miner in their homes, Bitcoin miners were designed to be run in industrial warehouses, right? At the industrial scale. They're not practical or feasible for running in the home. They sound like a shop vac running all 24/7 in your house. So they're extremely intrusive.
It's louder than my shop vac, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's loud.
close. It's close.
So they've got to be non-intrusive. They've got to be plug and play simple. And what that means to me is you drop this thing, you put this thing in the home. It doesn't require any special install work. It doesn't require you going into your water heater and altering your water heater or altering your HVAC system. Like, you got to be able to just drop this thing in the home, plug it in, maybe connect it to Wi-Fi, and away you go. And so a little backstory on this component of it. So when I was on my journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and started, being tempted by Bitcoin mining, I wanted to start mining in my home. I was like, all right, it's cold here in Utah. I want to be heating my home with Bitcoin or with Bitcoin miners. And the problem is the house that I live in, I own the home, but it only has one 220 volt outlet, and that's where my dryer is, right? And so I was this close, super close to going and running my own 220 volt line and setting up a site where I could start running these miners. And there was nothing stopping me from doing that. I mean, I have the know-how as an electrical engineer. I owned the home, so I wasn't restricted from doing it. But just before I was about to do it, I was like, wait a minute. There are millions of other homes like mine that only have a single 220 volt or no 220 volt outlet, and they only have 120 volt access in their homes. So if I go solve the problem for myself, but just by taking the easy route and installing my own 220 volt outlet, then I've kind of just numbed myself to the pain that the broader market is living through. And so I want to figure out how to solve it so that I can mine in my house without having to install 220 volts.
Yeah, it's more that when you think about it from like a market perspective, the entrepreneurial mindset is, how do I solve a problem for other people? How do I solve a problem in the market? And by installing the 220 plug, you haven't actually solved the problem. You've gotten around the problem by solving the electrical system in your house, but the product isn't solving the problem, which is the point, right? You want the product to be the thing to fit in. Like, the product doesn't need an outlet with it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and if I want to break into the pre-coiner market, remember, it's got to be plug and play simple. Like, if I'm going and knocking on a stranger's door that knows nothing about Bitcoin, and my first kind of gotcha is, oh, we have to strap you with $1,000 electrician bill to install 220 volts. Like, forget about it. It's not happening.
It's done.
Right? It has to be plug and play simple. And so non-intrusive, plug and play simple. And then the last big requirement, and sorry, when I say non-intrusive, that's both the noise from the noise standpoint, but also from a lifestyle standpoint, right? Like, it can't change or force them to alter their lifestyle. So it's got to be Like I just plug this thing in, it hashes away, and it's not going to be intrusive or force them to change lifestyle. And then the last one is the unit economics have to work out, right? And that's we kind of
Yeah.
already touched on that. Like somebody that doesn't know Bitcoin isn't going to go and outlay a bunch of cash up front on some speculative Bitcoin mining opportunity. So we've got to figure out the unit economics there. So um, as I'm working through this, I've done probably a dozen different business models trying to figure out how do we go and store in the pre-coiner market and break into that market that's 1,000 times bigger. Um, and so as I'm looking at these different opportunities and working with these constraints, I realize, okay, first thing to solve is it's got to power from 120 volts. So I developed a product that I call the Loki board that essentially tricks modern ASICs or modern miners into hashing from 120 volts. Now there's some power consumption constraints that you have to be mindful of, but it essentially allows you to take a single hash board from a modern miner and pair it with the Loki board, and you can start hashing at modern efficiencies from 120 volts. In an effort to make this more available to everybody, I ended up throwing that on a website called pivotalpleb.com. Just to anyone that wants to get their hands on these Loki boards and start building their own Loki rigs.
Yeah, Pivotal Pleb Tech is the
Pivotal Pleb Tech is the
social
name of the
handle.
company. Yeah.
Or then and it's pivotalpleb.com is the website.
Pivotalpleb.com.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll have the link in the show notes, but yeah.
And the idea here is just, hey, as I'm solving these problems for this bigger vision, which by the way, I should back up and say, so the company that we've started to go and tackle this hyper decentralization is called Unbound Networks, and we're currently flying under the radar. There's 6 of us in the company. We don't have a website up yet. We just barely got a logo. Right? So it's like we're still super under the radar. But as we're solving these problems for Unbound Networks, the idea here is, well, let's get this technology out to the plebs. Anyone that wants to go and do this same thing, like we're serious. Our biggest goal here is hyper decentralization.
Yeah.
Right.
Piece by piece, release the building process.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we developed the Loki board, allows you to run from 120 volts. Made that available to anyone that wants to go buy it. It's like $20 on the website. And it's been awesome to see, right? When I first unlocked this ability to hash from 120 volts with modern miners, I immediately thought there were a million different things I wanted to try. The space to explore is so big. And I thought, I've got to get this out in the hands of these plebs and put the pleb miner passion to work and let them start exploring it alongside of me. And so made those Loki board technology available to everybody. And out of the woodwork, you get people like Travis Bickle or Sat Stacking Pleb on Twitter that are just like, they're just killing it. They've got all this creativity flowing, and they're making these really awesome Loki rigs, as I like to call them, just all these different configurations, and they're hashing from 120 volts. And there's some exciting work and partnerships that are developing behind the scenes that I can't share right now. But with those guys are out like planning their own businesses around getting this technology out. And it's just awesome to see. So we solved the hashing from 120 volts. Now for the non-intrusive low noise, that's by far been the hardest one to solve. And a really common thing that a lot of pleb miners do is they'll buy these low noise AC Infinity duct fans, AC Infinity Cloudline duct fans. But the problem with that is the miner's control board can't control the speed of the duct fan, and so people are just running these fans at constant speed, which isn't great because now you're running your fan at constant speed, and the temperature is going to be fluctuating a ton. You want to hold that temperature of your hash boards consistent so that you don't get temperature cycling and stress the electrical components. So
yeah, one thing just as an anecdote of like my going down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to solve the noise problem is that the fans, it's interesting, like, you can just go on Amazon and buy a bunch of quiet fans or whatever. But if you look at the, what's it called? I can't remember what the acronym is, but the volume.
Yeah, cubic feet per minute, CFM.
Yeah, CFM, thank you. Of the fans, you'll notice that all the quiet ones literally just trade off how much air they can move, which like completely defeats the purpose, because you're not going to cool anything if, like, the reason the thing's so damn loud is because it's got a lot of cooling to do. You have to move air,
a lot of power to dissipate.
And so I tried to I looked at a bunch of different things. I have a whole stack of those like silent ninja fans or whatever it is, and I was literally thinking about having a larger thing that just pulled. Like I was trying to do the math on like what I need to do to just pull enough air through it. And that's when everybody was like, oh, the AC infinity fan, just get a freaking AC infinity fan. And then you were talking about the being able to plug it into the miner so the miner's controlling. And I was like, somebody's already done all this work. I'm not going to,
Well,
other people are doing this for me.
it's funny. It's like a rite of passage to be a pleb miner, to go and fill an Amazon cart with like 25 different fans, right? I want to try this fan. I want to try this one.
I have two different AC Infinity fans that I'm trying. I think I'm going to go with the more advanced one with the remote and the stuff, just because it moves a lot larger volume. But I want to try them both out just to see, because the other option is like super cheap. The standard, like just kind of like the bucket fan or whatever that they have, it's only like 40 or $50. So if I can get it like working good on low power and just like have it always flowing.
Yeah, the problem you'll find with that fan is it doesn't have high enough static pressure. So the CFM is there, but an S19 requires about 200 Pascal of back pressure in order, like it creates 200 Pascal of back pressure. So if you have those, I think I know which one you're talking about, that bucket fan, or the radial fan that they have. The CFM looks great, but then when you look at the back pressure, there's just not enough. So what ends up happening is your CFM just rolls off. Really, it hardly pushes anything through as soon as you put any back pressure on it. Whereas the Cloudline fans, they're a lot more expensive.
So the resistance fights the fan doesn't have the power to fight the resistance as it's pulling through a smaller.
Right. Now the Cloudline fan, on the other hand, it has high CFM and high static pressure. So it can push those.
Stat that I didn't see. I didn't even know. There was a whole nother statistic that I need to think about. That makes sense. Because like your engine, your magnetic engine needs to be strong enough to, like, if there's resistance, it needs to keep up with the volume. And
I think the best analogy is thinking about a garden hose and flow rate of water through the garden hose, right? Like you can have a firefighter's hose that can push firefighter's hose isn't a great example. You can have a garden hose that is putting a lot of water through, but as soon as you start to kink it, the water goes to a little trickle. Well, that kink represents the back pressure in the system, right, or the resistance to airflow or water flow in the system. And you can have a ton of water flowing, but as soon as there's a little kink, it goes to a trickle. Well, the same thing happens with these fans, right? You have great CFM under no pressure, but as soon as you kink it, you put a heat sink in front of it, the CFM.
Put a freaking miner on the other end that you have to pull it through. Yeah.
Right. So the AC Infinity is, it's more like the fire hose, where it's like, you can't kink that thing. It's got so much back pressure or so much static pressure that it can push, a ton. So anyway, thanks to a lot of work that's been done with pleb miners, I started, did the rite of passage where I had 25 different fans in my Amazon cart and bought them all and found out none of them were good enough. And then came across, thanks to work by other pleb miners, came across the AC Infinity. But then I realized, wait a minute, everyone's just running these AC Infinity Cloudline fans at the same speed, and to be safe, most of them are running at like 60 to 70%, just so that they don't overheat their miner. And I started playing around with that and realized, oh wait, there's nothing to say that we can't just let the control board control the AC Infinity. So I built this little board called the Njord board. It's the Njord is the Norse god of wind, so I named it after Njord. So the Njord board controls.
Geeks are so clever. You're the best.
It allows the control board to control the speed of the AC Infinity fan. And now what ends up happening is now you can modulate the speed of the fan to maintain constant hashboard temperatures. And you can do it at a lot lower fan speeds. Right? So
out of curiosity, how difficult was the integration there? Because I was trying to find, I don't even know, like, where do you get that level of information? Because I went digging through the AC Infinity fan. I was like, so what's because there's like a remote and there's an app, right, to control this thing. And I'm like, so how does one, you can't like just Google search, like what kind of like code format does it use? Like what's the programming standard it uses for ratchet up fan, ratchet down fan, like for its things? And how would you translate that between the format that the machine uses, that the miner uses? Because I mean, granted, I don't know this isn't my forte or whatever, I spent a shocking number of hours looking and came up with not very much useful information on this.
You're not going to find it on Google. This is where my hardware and embedded systems background comes to light. I literally bought an AC Infinity fan. I ripped out to the bare circuit board, started probing around, and found. So I'm showing this little tool here. This is a little desktop O-scope that allows me to see electrical signals and kind of hack into them and decode them. And I essentially ripped apart an AC Infinity fan, got down to the circuit board, put a bunch of taps on the control board to see how it was controlling the fans, and then went and looked at the AC Infinity fan to see how its controller was controlling the fan, mapped the two, and created the Njord board that essentially translates what the control board is saying to a language that the AC Infinity speaks.
Wow, so you're not even seeing it from the context of like whatever code it would be running.
No,
You're just looking purely at the signal. So it's kind of like the flipper for hardware. That little I think it's the flipper. The little thing that just does all the wireless stuff, and it can hack into, like, you can like you can copy your car keys, your key fobs and stuff like that. So really great. It's a cool little device, and it's just like kind of a universal, any sort of wireless signal it can take in, and it's got like an antenna and a signals sender for every damn thing under the sun. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi,
it
key
sounds
fob,
like you're describing
like
the
NFC.
Wireshark's another one. Wireshark does a lot of network traffic stuff, right? So I'm not having to get in decipher code or get access to the code base. It's literally just observing
like
the inputs and outputs.
Which electrical ping does what, and then just take this one, turn it into the other one, and send it forward. I don't really care what your program looks like. I'm an electrical engineer, bitch. I undermine the whole system. This episode is brought to you by the Fold Card. This is the debit card that gets you sats back on literally everything in your life. Actually got some boost back today on Starbucks, and they have a ton of these now for specific merchants like Who. This is HU. This is actually a company that I've been a big fan of for a long time. I think it was like 2.5 or 3% back if I spend at Who online. They make like super clean chocolates and like little cookies and stuff that are all grain-free, keto-friendly, and they're absolutely delicious. I had no idea until I was just looking through the boost that they had added that on. I was like, oh my God, I am so excited. Then of course we also got our Whole Foods today. We got our groceries, and because Whole Foods takes Amazon gift cards, we got 2.5% back on our groceries. And that's literally just the gift cards and the boosts. The card, the debit card, which is my main card, I swipe it and I get sats. I just get sats all the time, and I get spins so that I can win free sats also. I get daily spins, which on the spin wheel, you can literally win up to a full Bitcoin. Like, people have genuinely won an entire Bitcoin, 100 million sats, just from the spin wheel, just from using the Fold Card. And understand, I have used this to replace a boring, crappy, I hate to deal with it, normal fiat bank. This has replaced that, and now it pays me sats all the time. I've gotten a quarter of a Bitcoin. Again, I did not pay, I did not buy, I did not like stack ongoing with like a pre-purchase plan a quarter of a Bitcoin. I got a quarter of a Bitcoin back with all of the purchases that I normally make in fiat by getting 1%, 2%, 3% back on just normal things that I do. So if I spend $100, I get like $2 in Bitcoin. This is unbeatable when it comes to a low barrier way to stack enormous amounts of sats over time. Check them out. Go to bitcoinaudible.com/fold. That is my special link that will also give you like 100,000 free sats just for checking it out, just for trying it. Again, bitcoinaudible.com/fold. It's right there in the show notes, so it'll be really easy to find. Check it out.
So this is all in an effort, again, to being non-intrusive and lowering the noise, right? And so when I discovered this, was like, hey, this is pretty cool. This might be helpful for pleb miners that are trying to make it more feasible to mine in the home. So let's make this available as well. Let's like produce this technology and make it available for sale as well. And so, you can go get that on Pivotal Pleb. And I'm not trying to show these products. I'm just trying to tie into this story and this vision of like,
they're great. That's awesome.
But I'm mainly just trying to tie it into this story of like, look, we need some technological pieces to meet these requirements to allow us to break into the pre-coiner market. And so, with this Njord board, you can run an AC Infinity Cloudline fan. People that buy it and install it on their product are seeing that rather than having to run the Njord or the Cloudline fan at a level of like 60 or 70%, it's now hanging out around 20% in a lot of cases, right? So they're saving themselves a ton of power through the fan and a lot of noise. Like, it's just way quieter when it's running at 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times people are like, wait a minute, what's this? Like, you have this Unbound Networks, you have Pivotal Pleb, like what's what? And Pivotal Pleb is just like an outlet for the work that we're doing at Unbound. It's like, yeah, we're just spinning these products out and making them available for anybody. But getting back to the main vision, right? So the Loki board and the Njord board, like, they're fun, and I hope that pleb miners can just do amazing things with them. I want to empower people to go like unleash their creativity and find ways to solve it with these simple building blocks. But they're looking at the bigger vision, we want to build a company that hyper decentralizes Bitcoin mining. Our goal is to heat 1 million homes with Bitcoin miners in the next 5 years. So how do we do that? And
I was about to say,
sorry,
tell me what
we
that means. What does that
we've
look like?
gotten into a lot of the little details along the way. And me, as being a technology guy, often answer with the in detail geeky answer first. But kind of zooming back out and going high level here, let's heat 1 million homes with Bitcoin miners over the next 5 years. How are we going to accomplish that? Well, if we're empowered with a product that is, again, plug and play simple, non-intrusive, and the unit economics work out. Now, if we can build a business model and a plan around how to go and distribute that, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think. So, in order to make the unit economics work out, you have to, especially for a pre-coiner, we have to find a way to come up with some economic incentive that works for them. And so, as we're, as I'm looking at this and diving in, I recognize that there are energy arbitrage opportunities where you have people that are heating their homes with relatively expensive heating fuels. An example of this is propane. So, 20 years ago when a lot of rural homes were being built, it was the cost of heating with propane versus the cost of heating with electricity was on par, or is at parity. Whereas now the price of propane over the last 20 years has gone up significant compared to the price of electricity. Now both have gone up, but the price of propane has outpaced the price of electricity in a lot of different jurisdictions. Now, so the idea is can we use energy arbitrage where someone is using a more expensive heat fuel? Can we replace that expensive heat fuel with a cheaper heat fuel like electricity using Bitcoin miners? Now it's interesting because if you just go and look at the macros for the U.S., for example, if you take the average electric rate and the average propane rate, you're not going to that energy arbitrage opportunity doesn't present itself. But when you start getting down to the more localized level, rural communities where a large number of people are using propane to heat their home, and you start looking at different electric rates, you can start to identify these big energy arbitrage opportunities. So, for example, there's a electric provider in southwest Montana called Vigilante Power. They offer electricity for 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the residential rate. The propane is north of $2 a gallon. So when you go and convert those to equivalent kilowatt hour, a home in the Vigilante Power jurisdiction can save about $200 to $300 a month in heating, 2,000 square foot home in heating bills alone, just by switching from propane to electricity.
That's a ton. That's crazy.
And Southwest Montana isn't the only jurisdiction like that, right? So we start to form this idea of, hey, can we make it so that we can go to any person's home? They don't have to know anything about Bitcoin. We can knock on their door and say, hey, if you're willing to host a piece of my distributed network, I can lower your heating bill by as much as $200 to $300 a month. Now suddenly, again, this person didn't have to know anything about Bitcoin. Now suddenly there's an economic incentive for a pre-coiner to listen at the very least, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, if we can identify these zones of energy arbitrage or these energy arbitrage opportunities, we can now go build a strategy around how to distribute this. So, and by the way, these efforts at Unbound, we're primarily focusing on rural communities because natural gas is usually the most common heat source of choice for urban homes because it's just so cheap. Urban and suburban homes usually have natural gas, and it's really hard to compete with natural gas. So if your home is heated with natural gas, there's not a huge energy arbitrage opportunity. But propane, heating fuel, even wood stoves or wood pellets present an opportunity. Even heating with electricity presents an opportunity. So we're focusing primarily on propane. And so in an effort to try to identify, all of our different potential market participants, we created a machine learning script that essentially allows us to. We got an address database for the entire U.S. And then we created this script that allows us to take that address, go get a satellite image of that address from Google Maps, and then throw that image into our machine learning algorithm that essentially image recognition algorithm that can detect if there's an above ground propane tank sitting next to the house. So now with this ability or with this technology, we can now go and identify, potentially millions of homes that are heated with propane. And then we take that and we overlay that with our electric rates data. We have we have essentially marginal residential electric rates for every county in the country. And now we can go overlay that and start to identify these economic arbitrage opportunities.
And now we will start the episode of AI Unchained.
Yeah.
So so you've done this, right? And I think we talked about this in the first round here, is that you've basically tested this stack of proving that you can actually do this, and you intend to do that at scale for both the United States and Canada, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so we're starting in we're starting in a small group of states: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and then going out from there. So yeah, we've built this entire AI image recognition propane stack, and we've run that on select counties in Montana.
And does it seem like they're clustered, out of curiosity? Like, do you suspect, with the data that you've seen so far, I know it's a small subset of the full data set that you want to get, which this is just so crazy to think that you have, that there is this full data set, that you just have satellite imagery of the whole freaking country, and that you can just go,
it's a little
you can run a local AI and just go hunting for stuff. It just blows my mind the way things are unfolding in that. But regardless, does it seem like so far that it's going to be like something very disparate, where like, one propane person is over here and then the next one's 30 miles away? Or is this something where it just seems like everybody in this one particular area just happens to be stuck on propane, and they've collectively not upgraded, or the movement has been slower in some particular area versus another, such that you have a very targeted area rather than like a huge disparate like web that you kind of have to manage, so to speak?
Yeah, so the short answer is it's both. What we'll find is you do have those homes that are way out in the boonies that are propane, right? And they're 30 miles apart from anything else. But then you also have small communities. Now it's usually towns that are less than a few thousand people. If you start getting more than a few thousand people, you'll have the gas company come in. They'll pay for the infrastructure to run natural gas to all the homes. But anything at less than a few thousand people in a town, it's just not worth it to the gas companies to go build out that infrastructure. So, small rural towns, which there are a ton of them, like, there's a lot of flyover states, so to speak. And so but getting to I think actually one thing you're getting at here is how spread out is this, and how feasible is it going to be to grow this 1 million home network? Now keep in mind, if we're going to, a couple things here. If we're going to really address the attack vector of being shut down by regulators, we can't be
running a mining pool.
You can't be concentrated in a single location.
Yeah.
And you can't be concentrated in a single legal entity. And I would extend that further to what you said. You can't be concentrated in a single mining pool, or at the very least, you have to be ready to jump ship to another mining option if that pool gets shut down. So to address that, there's another element or another component to the business model here. So Unbound is developing this equipment, these home miners, and I'll just call it what it is. It's a mining space heater, similar to hands-free Bitcoin, or similar to other companies that have tried, or Heatbit, other people that have tried this, but with significant constraints put on this product to make it practical and feasible for the home. So we're developing this home Bitcoin miner space heater we're going to drop in these homes. And then we're going to develop out our own network. But we understand that it's not enough for us to just develop our own decentralized network. We want to make this available for pleb miners with all this pent up passion. So going back to, can we empower pleb miner passion to harness free market forces to break into the pre-coiner market? So the idea here is we'll build these Bitcoin space heaters, and then we will make these available. We're targeting about $20 per terahash. We'll make these available for pleb miners and tradesmen that want to build out their own decentralized network to go buy these one at a time, these miners one at a time, and start placing them in homes. Now, why is that significant? Because
real quick question. Hold on to why is that significant? How does $20 per terahash compare in the context of like the device, and like what sort of heat it's going to produce versus like getting an ASIC or getting like a big miner?
Yeah.
And also, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So first thing on the pricing, you can get like an S19K today for like $13, $14 a terahash, right? And that's going to be like the most efficient. The XP is a little bit more efficient, but you can get
Mm-hmm.
super efficient miners for $13, $14 at today's hash price. So $20 is arguably a little bit more expensive. But here's the key. With this business model, and I don't think I did a good enough job earlier on explaining this, but with this business model, the owner of the hardware is not paying for the electricity to run this miner. So in this business model, we have what we call the network owner, the person that actually owns the hardware, and then you have what we call the microhost, which is like the homeowner or the person that's running their home, right? So now
Mm-hmm.
if a homeowner has agreed to be a microhost and to host this equipment in their home to use it for heating, they're paying for the electricity and they're happy to do so because they're saving several $100s a month on their heating bill. So now you as the network owner, the person that owns the miner, you're not having to pay for the electricity to run that miner, which makes it so
It's
much
all
more
profit.
valuable.
It's just
Yeah,
sats.
and by the way, because you're not paying for the electricity, you don't care as much about the efficiency of the miner, right? You
All you have to do is
technically,
pay off the $20 for every terahash you got.
yeah. And so we're to make the unit economics work out, we're trying to target our pricing so that these things can pay themselves off in 2 seasons, right? So two heating seasons, so a total of 12 months of hashing. Um,
Well,
and so you asked how does that compare as far as price and also as far as the heat. So we've got a couple different models. We're targeting a 500-watt model and a 1,000-watt model. A standard off-the-shelf Bitcoin miner, modern miner, is about 3,300 watts. So it'll you'll buy 3 of these, you'll disperse them, or you'll buy multiple of these and disperse them throughout the home in the different rooms. And we'll have the 500-watt model for areas in the home that are really sensitive to noise, and then we'll have the 1,000-watt for areas that are more maybe aren't as sensitive to noise.
mm-hmm.
So, for example, my business partner Clay, he's a fifth-generation rancher in Montana, and
Mm-hmm.
he went to go do some market research. He made a list of 76 rancher buddies that he knows, and he started going down the list. And the first 2 ranchers that he pitched this to and asked if they wanted to be a microhost, right? Asked if they'd host a piece of the distributed network. They essentially said, "You had me until you said Bitcoin." And so we changed our pitch and we said, "Okay, let's make it so that we don't have to say Bitcoin. They don't have to know
Okay.
anything about Bitcoin." So we changed the pitch, and it goes down the list, and every single one of them after that is like, "How soon can I get one? I want to heat my chicken coop. I want to heat my horse stalls. I want to heat like all this other stuff, right?" And
And talk about
uh,
the perfect like group of people. Like those are the true sovereign that are left in the United States, right?
right,
The
right,
ranchers out there.
yeah, the rural ranchers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the idea of there's just something so poetic about going to rural communities first. Anyway, so that's a little bit about how the hash price compares and the power consumption compares.
Yeah.
And again, as the network owner, and that's a really salient point that I failed to mention earlier on, but the network owner isn't paying for the electricity, and so you can kind of be a little more laxed about the efficiency rate. So what does that unlock for us? Well, because we're not worried about tip top or a cutting edge efficiency, we can go pick up old miners that are flooding the market from these bit large centralized miners but their business model requires them to always have the most efficient machines to stay
Mm-hmm.
competitively relevant, right? And so they're offloading these older machines for pennies on the dollar so they can go buy the newest, most efficient machine. And so that allows us to then go pick up these old machines, repurpose them, configure them into these home miners, and now sell them at a relatively low price per terahash compared to something like the heat bit that's $70 per terahash, right? So okay, so here's the bigger vision of the bigger model, right?
Yeah.
You have your network owners that are now going out and building their own hyper decentralized networks at their own pace. They can for if it's a 30 terahash machine for $600, they can go and one $600 unit at a time build at their own pace in their moonlight hours or on the weekends. They can go and build out their own decentralized network. The reason that we really want to focus on going back to that point that I said a little while ago, like this is why it's important. We want to essentially make this. Someone put a good way to explain it is like the Avon of ASICs, right? We want to have a bunch of network owners that are running their own businesses and building their own decentralized networks, and we'll just be providing the products to them, and they can go build at their own rate. What does that do for us? One, it helps mitigate that attack vector, right? We now don't have a centralized entity that's owning all these different machines or hash rates.
And you haven't
Two,
recreated the centralization problem. What you've done is you've offered. It's kind of like rather than setting up your own LSP or something, just using an example of something I talk about on the show all the time. So rather than setting up your own LSP and then trying to be like the biggest LSP, you're selling a software stack that just lets anyone automatically run their own LSP. You know, like everybody is just they have the product, they have the business model. It's almost like a franchising of decentralized little tiny little mining networks,
Right,
almost in a
exactly.
sense, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Franchising is a good way to put it. Other than we don't want to be,
You don't own anything. You don't control it. Yeah.
we don't plan on charging rent, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't want to be rent seekers. Like we'll provide the hardware. You'll buy the hardware straight up from us, and you'll own the hardware. You'll own all the hash rate. Now, as part of the hardware that we're developing for future generations is we want our network owners to be able to track and trace their miners remotely. So
Hmm.
we will be adding. We're working on designing out our own control board with GPS and internet connectivity through cellular internet connectivity, right? So now this allows the owners, the network owners, to have through a backend or an enterprise level backend dashboard, they can see on a map where all their miners are and get the status, and then go and control things, right? So like if me as a network owner, if I've installed 10 of these things, or I've installed these in 10 homes around my local community, and someone wants to change the password on their Wi-Fi, right? So now their miner's not connecting. I want to be able to go in and remotely update the Wi-Fi credentials so that they can log in, and just makes it a lot more feasible for me to manage this decentralized fleet.
Hmm.
So by doing this and making this available, not only are we addressing the attack vector, the centralization attack vector, and changing the trajectory, but we're also making it feasible. Some of the common feedback we get is in kind of what you were hinting at with your question earlier on about how localized or how spread out are these rural homes.
Hmm.
If there's one central company that's trying to scale to 1 million rural homes, like forget about it. That's a logistical nightmare. It's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Additionally, rural communities. I grew up in rural Idaho. My co-founder grew up in rural Montana. Like we understand that outsiders, like rural communities, just don't really trust outsiders.
Yeah.
But we also know that in rural communities, everybody talks at church on Sunday. Like everybody, when someone finds something good, like the whole community knows about it. And so
Yeah.
the idea here is,
Yeah.
can we go find rural plebs or even tradesmen that maybe have a landscaping business and they have good cash flows in the summertime, but they're looking for supplemental income in the wintertime. Like if we can go find these,
Oh, that's clever. Didn't
yeah,
think about
these
that. Yeah.
these rural champions, right? These rural plebs that are championing Bitcoin, they know 5, 10 people in that rural community that they can go, that's going to trust them to go install this in their homes.
Hmm.
Um, just as an anecdote, when I was doing some market research, I have a friend back in my small town in Idaho that is looking for supplemental income. So I call him and present this opportunity to him, kind of unpack the business opportunity and ask, like, would you be interested in being a network owner and like slowly growing this? And at first he was pretty tepid. Like, yeah, I don't know. And I knew that he was eyeing it. He has a couple of rental properties, and I knew he was eyeing buying another rental property. So we unpacked the numbers of, okay, what's your ROI look like? What does your cash flow look like for owning this rental property versus buying, this number of machines, taking that money you would have put towards a down payment and using it to buy these machines. And as we start to unpack the numbers and look at the cash flow, and he's like, well, how soon can I get my hands on these? Like, I know 10 people. I have 10 friends in the community right now that I could go put, Bitcoin miners in their home.
Dude,
And
2 seasons return on like that's crazy. That's really
yeah,
crazy. I mean, you think of like just comparing it to something that you can invest large amounts of capital in a rental property. You don't make a return
yeah.
in
What's the
2 years. You
cap
kidding
rate?
me?
I mean,
Yeah.
a good capitalization rate on an investment or a rental property investment is like 10 to 12 years, right? Like it takes you
Yeah.
10 to
It's
12 years
nuts.
just to pay back your down payment, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when we talk about the cap rate being 2 years and then the cash flow that's there, he was just like, how soon can I get these, right? And
Yeah.
we feel pretty strongly that we've got a pretty good business model here and a good case to make for going and building out these big decentralized networks and having networks owners all across the country building these out at their own pace.
And
Um,
I think there's also, we briefly mentioned this the last time we did this, but there's also an opportunity in people who are replacing their heating units, because replacing a unit like this is specifically why I did all of the work to get the M30s hooked up here is because, and the M30s, I mean, I got profitable miners, right? Like, I mean, or at least break even, so to speak. I got ones that were more expensive than I needed to get just because I wanted to. But they only cost me $1,200 a piece, and this was, I think they're cheaper now, if I'm not mistaken,
a lot
um,
cheaper.
a lot cheaper. And but if when they came to replace the heat, when I realized that the thing was out and it was, the
Your
heat
furnace had
exchanger
gone down.
the furnace had gone down, the heat exchanger was cracked, and it was pumping carbon monoxide into the house.
Oh no.
Um, and so and they were like, so we have to replace it. And it was like, it was literally like the day before the coldest day of the entire year. It was like December 19th or something like that. So we were trying to get the thing replaced, and they gave me a quote for like 7 or 8 grand to replace the heat, to have a new heating unit in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, my miners were $2,400. Like, if I'm losing money just pulling in sats or whatever, if I'm losing money on this, how many years do I have to have like 10% over cost
Right. Where's
to
that
cover the cost of the extra $6,000 worth of installing a heating unit, a central heating unit, if I avoid that cost, you know?
Right.
It's just crazy to think about. And it kind of gives you a natural progression of, okay, well, how do we go from, if we're super successful in this kind of low end simplistic market, how do we go to a whole house heating unit? How do we go to partnering with, maybe even AC heating companies to install this by doing a revenue share with them so that they have a long-term capital flow or something? And you have them have this as like a touch point of like, well, we can do it for $4,000 if you do this, or we can have no upfront and you just pay for the labor, and you let us run this machine. And then there's another long-term thing, is that as people realize that this thing's mining Bitcoin, and Bitcoin becomes more popular and more kind of ubiquitous in the world, well then, as the thing gets quote unquote less profitable from the context of are they going to replace it, or are they going to do a different heating option, and they're going to get something that's like slightly more efficient, as the arbitrage goes away, well, now you can just go right back to them and be like, all right, well, you don't have to do that. Let me just split 40%. My CapEx,
Right.
I've made this thing profitable 3 years ago. So let's just split it half and half. So, whatever your arbitrage opportunity is to have a more efficient heating solution, well, I'll just pay you some sats.
Yeah. Right.
And as it's more viable, or as it's more popular, they're like, okay, well, yeah. Rather than running away from Bitcoin, they'll be interested in now getting an income from this thing that they had previously just gotten for free.
You touch on an important aspect of this whole endeavor, and that is, if you can, I found that one of the best ways to introduce people to Bitcoin outside of number go up. I mean, that definitely, number go up definitely brings in the most people, but one really clever way of getting people interested in Bitcoin is through mining, right? And so one of the huge motivators here is, if we're in 1 million homes, we intend to, like I said, we want to make it so that we can get these miners placed without the homeowner or the microhost needing to know anything about Bitcoin. Like, it has to be like brain dead simple for them. But once we've got the miner installed in their home and they start getting some payout, or they start seeing some savings, or maybe, if the network host feels like it, they can share some of the mining revenue with them. But as they start seeing those savings, they're going to start getting curious about, like, wait, how's this working? We intend to build out an educational drip campaign on Bitcoin with the eventual goal of orange pilling hundreds of thousands of these homeowners, right? And so we help to bring about that intransigent minority that we got to get to, 10 million diehard Bitcoiners in the U.S. Well, if we can go and start Trojan horsing, so to speak, all of these micro hosts.
Get 1 million miners, like that intransigent minority becomes a lot easier,
right?
as far of a like kind of first step, like entry door into reaching that limit, or that threshold.
Right. So, and the possibilities, like once we crack into that pre-coiner market, so there are a lot more opportunities, right? You've got people like Schnitzel on Twitter that are doing Bitcoin water heaters, or Adrian Van Wyck as well, doing Bitcoin water heaters. Like, you have some cool things going on.
This episode is brought to you by Nodeless.io. This is the way to get your friends who are pre-coiners, who are like kind of interested and want to be able to accept Bitcoin, but just don't want the headache. They don't want the setup issues and trying to figure out how to run a Lightning node. They just want to be able to plug in an address and then have all of the web front end that they need for a charity, for their project, for their WooCommerce store, their online sales, all of these different things. And then just no obligation, no subscription, no KYC, just receive payment, and it goes directly to their address, to their cold card, to their hardware wallet, whatever it is. This is why Nodeless exists. to lower that barrier as much as possible, to make it as easy as it can be to set this up and for people to join the Bitcoin economy. Listen, as someone who runs a node and who has BTC Pay Server and loves tinkering with a lot of these things, I am using Nodeless because it's just that easy. And that's also why I'm offering 10,000 free sats to anyone who goes, just sign up with email, whatever you want to do. Really quick sign up. Again, no subscription, no obligation, no KYC. Just create an account, go to the create a donation page, make a donation page, and I will be your first donation. I will share it on Nostr, share it on Twitter, and just tag me in it so that I see it in my notifications. And I will go there and I will throw you 10,000 sats. Then stay there, look around, check out the project. I think this is a really, really cool. It's still new, and I just think there's a massive amount of potential here, and I think a lot of you guys can benefit from it. So that's why I'm willing to throw you 10,000 sats just to go check it out. Use my link specifically, by the way. That helps, just so that they know that I sent you over there. You can find that in the show notes, or just go to bitcoinaudible.com/nodeless. Again, that is bitcoinaudible.com/nodeless. I just saved this the other day, and I can't remember. I sent them a message. I need to check to see if they actually responded. But somebody has a unit that they've designed or whatever. There's a pool heater.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
it's got like three miners like stuck in it or whatever. And I was immediately like, because one of the things as far as like the main heating unit, the one thing that gets me, which it makes a whole lot more sense, or it's a simpler thing to handle when you're talking about like a smaller unit that's just like in a room, but is having the miner in the actual airflow, like in the actual ducting system specifically, is a little bit like, okay, well, you know, there's always the possibility, it's a piece of electronics, right? Like there's always the possibility of it catching fire or smoking or, you know, something like that. And I would like to not have that in my ventilation system as a thinking about the failure mode, right?
Right.
But if the thing is in oil and running through a radiator, if I actually have an enclosure, well, then that solves practically everything, because the fan can, I can basically just use the fan that I've already got up in the unit, like this plugged into the thermostat for controlling the heat or whatnot, and this just basically pump everything through a radiator, and then it's not going to catch on fire because it's submerged, you know, like, or at least it's just never going to be that sort of an issue. It's never going to pump smoke into the unit because it's not, or into the house,
The
because
air,
the air's not going through it. Yeah.
Right. It's a super promising and elegant design concept, and I think, you know, I've seen lots of other ones that I get really excited about, and I think that they all have a place in the Bitcoin future. I think the challenge is that you have this chicken and egg problem, right? Because again, the Bitcoin maxi market just isn't quite big enough to host enough home miners to make a dent in centralization, and pre-coin or Bitcoin just isn't big enough and well known enough for, like, pre-coiners just aren't going to let you go and punch holes in their wall or drastically alter their lifestyle or their home infrastructure, right? And so going back to what I said, I think that there's a future for all of these awesome innovations and ways to use the Bitcoin heat or the mining heat, but we have to crack into that pre-coiner market first. And so, to be honest, plug and play space heaters was my least favorite because it's the least elegant, right? I was really excited about the pool heaters and the water heaters, but I realized it's a critical first step. We have to make it so plug and play simple.
It's how you get there.
Yeah,
it's how you get there.
Start getting into the homes, right?
Yeah.
And then I think once that vision plays out and you successfully achieve that vision, now it unlocks, and not that vision alone, but also like just Bitcoin naturally growing and people becoming more naturally aware of it. I think all of the market factors will now start to align to unlock the possibility of scaling something like a pool heater or scaling something like a water heater. And I hope I'm wrong there. Like, I hope that Schnitzel and these others that are working on these water heaters and pool heaters are wildly successful this year. Like, I really do, because I'm a diehard advocate of hyper decentralization. But I have a theory that the market factors just aren't there yet to enable mass market adoption among pre-coiners, right? So that's why I went and said, okay, space heaters, as much as it's not that elegant of a design, but that's where we're going to start, because that has the best opportunity, I think, of breaking into the pre-coiner market.
Yeah.
So anyway, I know we're getting a little long on time here, but and I hope that I've adequately discussed this vision. I found it's actually harder to talk about with you a second time because it doesn't have that same element of like, oh, I'm just so excited to share this with you. But you know, simply put, like, going back to the basics, right? Let's develop a product that empowers pleb miners to harness free market forces and break into the pre-coiner market so that we can significantly change the trajectory of Bitcoin mining centralization. And I think that, when we can go have thousands of or tens of thousands of network owners spread across the country going to their friends and families or communities and saying, hey, host a piece of this distributed network and save several $100s a month on your heating bill. Like that empowers plebs with those free market forces to go and start distributing hash in a very significant way.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how does or I guess the heater doesn't quite exist yet, but how would it behave in the context of, let's say it loses, you said it has a cell access so that the operator can, troubleshoot or sort out problems whenever they arise, and then, contact somebody and be like, oh, I'm trying to get into your Wi-Fi. So let's say it loses internet connection. Does it still continue to mine over the cell network? And that's something that the operator is paying for, like just on like a data basis, like for whatever cheap option that you can get. Or let's say both of them go out for some reason. Cell signal just sucks. I mean, we're talking about rural America, right? So does it just keep hashing to produce heat? Like just hash the only thing that it has on board, even though, it's outdated, so that it just remains a heater and it doesn't really worry about it? Like how do you intend to tackle that side of things?
So that's a great question. And I'll preface it first with saying this. We are building this business, and there are, after having scaled Owlet from, selling a few units to selling 1.5 million units, I understand that as much as I think I know, I don't know a fraction of what I need to know to be successful. And so there are a ton of known unknowns and a ton of unknown unknowns that we'll have to go and address. So this first year, we are planning on deploying these units as early as in October. We're planning on deploying units and building out our own Unbound Networks network, and really discovering all of these unknown unknowns.
You actually have something that's essentially operational, just not a final product.
Right. So we plan on going and distributing, half a dozen or to a dozen petahash worth of rigs in our own network. So Unbound Networks will be the network owner, and we're going to go out and figure out all these unknown unknowns.
Wow,
right?
That's awesome.
Because we're going to come across the case where, hey, Wi-Fi and internet are down, and now the homeowner isn't getting heat. Like, they're not going to be very happy about that. So how do we solve a solution for that? Or, another problem is maybe the homeowner's like, hey, there's just too many temperature gradients in my house. It's freezing in this room. It's hot in this room. Like, I want that even heat of central heating. So there's a lot of known unknowns and unknown unknowns that we're going to scale into. To answer your question specifically around what happens when the internet goes out, a couple things. One, when we go in and do it, so part of deploying these units is going in and doing an assessment of the home and figuring out, okay, what are your heating needs, looking at your heating bills, what are your heating needs, and doing looking at the layout of the home and figuring out where to plug in these machines. We don't intend to 100% replace the propane furnace. We want these machines. Remember, I said I don't want it to be like the unit can't require a change in lifestyle. So we want to be able to plug these things in and have them blend into the background. Like, we don't want the user going and having to constantly twiddle or adjust the temperature setting or anything. So in order to do that, we install these things in the home, and we install enough to take up about 70 to 80% of their heating needs. And then that last 20 to 30% of their heating needs is going to be handled by the furnace, right? So the furnace will actually still modulate the temperature. So now in the case where electricity goes out, in the case where internet goes out, we want the homeowner would still have their propane furnace to fall back on, type of thing. But so with that connection, mining doesn't require a ton of internet traffic, or a ton of bandwidth, but it's still a lot when you're talking about an IoT cellular connection and these what they call machine-to-machine internet connections. They still charge you by the megabyte, and it could be cost prohibitive to run the actual mining traffic over that cellular connection. So that cellular connection is just for tracking and remote controlling. We will still rely on Wi-Fi being up and available to be able to handle the bulk of the mining traffic, coming over the Stratum or Stratum v2 protocol. Sweet.
So, how will kind of the prepackaged nature of it be for the operator? So me, like, I'm going to do this.
Yes.
I don't know. This seems like a no-brainer. Like what's my entryway into this? Like, what's my obligation look like?
Yeah. So you buy the miner outright. Let's say 30 terahash rig, $600. you buy it outright, and now it's up to you to go and place that in somebody's home. Maybe that first home is your home, right? But eventually you go and place it in your friends and family's home, and then build out, extend beyond the friends and family network out into the community from there. But you go in, you knock on someone's door, you explain to them the benefits of hosting a piece of your distributed network. You do a site assessment of the home, you figure out where the best places to plug these in. And you as the network owner are going to have the opportunity to, maybe someone just wants minimal supplement, they just want minimal savings, and you just plug one machine in and you know that it's offsetting. Maybe you want to try to completely hash out their home, but you go in and you do a site assessment and say, okay, we're going to put 5 of these 30 terahash machines in your home, distributed throughout the different locations in your house. And then you as the network owner receive the Bitcoin. The homeowner or the microhost receives the savings, right? So their propane bill is going to go down. Their electric bill is going to go up, but it's not going to go up as much as their propane bill went down. And then you as the network owner receive the Bitcoin. And then it's also we're developing an automated payment structure where as you're deploying these in a microhost home, we're going to set them up with the homeowner will get set up with a Strike account. That's important because Strike allows you to set up an account without significant KYC, right? So you don't have to ask for their social security or their picture of their driver's license. And now as the network owner, you can we'll have an automated payment system that you can leverage to where if you want to do mining revenue shares with the network owner, or with the microhost, maybe in order to convince them, maybe saving a couple $100 a month wasn't enough. Maybe you also need to give them 10 to 20% of the mining proceeds. You'll set them up with a Strike account that only requires an email address, and then Strike recently enabled a static Bitcoin address. So now we can deposit mining proceeds from the miners straight to their static Strike Bitcoin address. And another cool feature that Strike has is, we want it so that they don't have to know anything about Bitcoin. Well, yeah. In Strike, you can either choose to receive the payout in cash or in Bitcoin. And so depending on where the microhost is on their Bitcoin journey, they can have that cash. So now you as the microhost, you've got these machines deployed. You've arranged with all these microhosts different payout structures, and then we've got the automatic payouts software that will essentially go and just stream sats to your wallet or to the homeowner's Strike account. So yeah, that's. Sorry, probably getting into a few too many details.
I'm very curious about them though. That's why I asked. And what's funny is that you can think of this, especially as like a hardcore Bitcoiner and like an evangelist for this, is that you can think of this as like kind of a 5-year plan to orange pill the hell out of somebody. Is that you have the opportunity. So let's say in 2 seasons you do turn it around and it's profitable. You've paid the whole thing off, and now you just simply have a revenue stream that costs you essentially nothing, but a relationship a Bitcoin related relationship that you would have had anyway, essentially, or would have wanted. And then you kind of have this option of going back to them voluntary, even like without them asking, and being like, by the way, I can, we set you up with Strike or whatever. I can now pay you $5 a month out of, what you have. Right. Just like, wait, what? It's like, yeah. I mean, right. This is making me capital. You're doing me a favor at the same time that I'm doing you a favor. Like this is a little enterprise where we're securing part of a global network, and like I'm happy to share this with you. I think, and you can receive it in Bitcoin or you can receive it in dollars. And then you open that conversation, and they're like, how is this making money? Like this is heating my house. Like I'm paying for this. Like that doesn't make any sense. And then like you've got an easy end to, they're curious. They want to know, why is this thing in my house paying me money? And one thing about kind of the bigger picture of this, and something I've always wondered is, people talk about that because of the mining profitability and like how things are going forward and, security budget and all of this stuff, is I've increasingly wondered if there's going to be enough wasted, lost, and below par energy uses or uses of energy or sources of energy that can be repurposed, that we could potentially continue to have a vastly more secure Bitcoin network where the overwhelming majority of the hash power isn't even profitable because it doesn't need to be. It
right?
doesn't need to be directly profitable. If you're mining methane, like like burned off methane, doesn't need to be profitable.
Right. There's there's
It
other
is like because the energy's free. Heat doesn't need to be profitable. Like my M30s, I don't give a shit if this is profitable. It doesn't like that's not the point. I
saving, yeah,
only
it's
turn them
saving,
on when it's cold. You
right,
know, like
right. Well, and
um,
I think a lot of the questions I get when I present this, or one question I see often is, well, two actually I want to cover, but one of them is, what kind of potential is there? Like, is this just like, some nice little trinket, so to speak, in the mine? Like, how much potential is there
mm,
for heating homes? Well, let's talk numbers real quick and potential market size. So if we can identify 1 million homes just in the U.S., I'm convinced there's more than 1 million homes in the U.S. that would fit this energy arbitrage opportunity. And on average, those homes could require as much in today's mining terms and mining machine terms and efficiency rates. They could require as much as 300 terahash to heat the home, right? So we've got 1 million homes that can host that have the electrical infrastructure and the heat need for 300 terahash per home. Do the math on that. That's 300 exahash. Like that is
that's the
that
network.
that's the net. That was the network 2 months ago. Now we're up north of a 400, but still, that is a significant amount of electrical infrastructure
That's a
that's already there.
reverse 51% attack. A hyper
Yeah,
decentralized reverse 51% attack right there is what that is.
and I mean that's heating in the U.S. alone, right? Like
Hmm.
let's go expand into
That's
Canada. They've
that's
got a ton of
that's more efficient heating
a better
in
a
the
better
US.
use of the
That is
heat.
economically positive
Yep,
heating
yep,
just in the US, just at 1 million houses. We might be looking at 3 to 5 to 10 in that gap somewhere,
right.
and a whole bunch of middle ground that might be interested and might not have much of an arbitrage opportunity, but enough, especially as this kicks off and you have these feedback loops happening in the network. Um,
Yeah, so this
that's
this is a major
crazy. That's
opportunity, right? This isn't
crazy.
just some like small hobbyist like, oh yeah, you guys
Yeah.
might pick up an exahash if you're
Yeah.
lucky. Like, no, there's
We're
and
talking about
in
doubling the network.
today's market dynamics, like everybody's scrambling for power, right?
Yeah.
Like there's all these long lines of people waiting to get hooked up, like getting power, getting that infrastructure developed to deliver that much power to the miners. It's like we've got 300 exahash worth of latent electrical infrastructure. Let's go take it over. The benefits are a more secure network and a hyper decentralized network.
Hmm. That's awesome. What a crazy thing. Even going through this whole thing a second time. It's just this is a this is a hell of a project. And it's also really cool too. One of the things about one of the things that I love about Bitcoiners is so many people who weren't builders, so many people who haven't kind of gone down that road and don't even have the experience in that. Like they've been in a fiat job, they've been in the fiat mines for a long time. They realize that they can actually make a difference. They realize that this is meaningful enough that, I mean, I can't tell you how many messages that I get just because of Bitcoin Audible or whatever, that people are like, man, like, I feel like it's time. Like, I gotta get out of what I'm doing and I want to be in Bitcoin. Do you know anybody who need someone on a project? You have any idea, like an idea of like what could be tackled? I'm in a pretty good position where I think I can contribute right now. All this stuff. This is a very common conversation that I have.
Yep.
Um, but the one downside to that, at the same time that that's an enormous upside, is that people are thinking differently about value. People are thinking differently about what they can actually impact.
Right. How they want to
But they're
contribute.
also fresh. They haven't delivered 1 million final products and a full product stack to the market. Whereas, and that's, I had no idea that that was going to be your perspective either. Like I said before, I just assumed that you had this hobby or this interest or whatever, and so like, oh, I'm going to build these little products or the little things like for DIY miners and stuff, and then come to find out that like the your claim to fame, so to speak, your the core of your knowledge base is in delivering a final product to millions of customers that is arguably a lot more meticulous and a lot more fine-tuned. Like it needs to be far more specific. So at the same time that this is a new and interesting market, and obviously not all the things don't apply, like there's no reason that I should think that you wouldn't be able to accomplish this task. I feel like you've accomplished a harder one in a sense. Um,
Well, I can give you probably
I want to hear your take on that. I want to hear your take on that actually.
having been through this, I can tell you there's
Hmm.
at least 1,000 reasons why I wouldn't be able to do this. But the one
Okay,
thing that
sure,
the
sure.
one thing I'm excited about is I have the experience of having done that before, and so I know what I'm getting into. And actually, one thing I'm really excited about is as all these pieces were kind of falling into place, and I was solving this puzzle in my mind, I was like, why has nobody done this before? And I think it's getting at the heart of what you're talking about, like to go and scale a product to 1 million homes or 1 million customers, it's hard. It is really
Yeah,
hard. And I
yeah.
think that's a big reason why there's so much miner centralization. Not to belittle the amount of work that goes into bringing a huge mining operation online. It is, I would argue, orders of magnitude more easy to go build a big centralized warehouse and stock it with a whole bunch of miners than it is to go and place miners in 1 million homes, right? So
Yeah.
I guess that maybe a simpler way of saying it is the low hanging fruit is what's led us to hyper centralized Bitcoin mining. Like people have gotten into the
Hmm.
low hanging fruit on these big mega
Path
centralized
of least
mining projects.
resistance.
Exactly.
It's just
And
always
so
been. Yeah.
I come into this space, I'm like, why is nobody doing this yet? And it's like, well, because, and again, not to slight anybody, but I think most of the people in this space are used to like large, big projects that there's one big payout at the end, right? My background in scaling Owlet from, to 1.5 million customers, like we scaled, we were a direct to consumer business. Like we didn't go, to fulfill one big contract and suddenly there's 1 million customers. Like we had to go find every single customer.
Every single person.
And
Yeah.
and so I've been through this before. Like I said, there's 1,000 reasons why we might fail, but at least I know I've been through this before. This is my first rodeo, and I'm super excited about the opportunity that has not yet been tapped because there's up to this point been lower hanging fruit. But I'm excited to go scale this to 1 million homes, and it can be done, and it has to be done, right? It's eventually we're going to get there one way or another. So let's go tackle it now.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. So uh maybe this is the opportunity to say how should people dive deeper into the project, and also how much left of the stack will we might maybe see on a Pivotal Pleb, um, for like additional kind of DIY version products as opposed to the full end suite. And do you have any other plans there as far as like other smaller problems that you might solve along the way for the pleb miner community, so to speak?
Yeah, I think we're myself and my team we're pretty committed to trying to make this available to anyone that has enough desire to go and build their own, right? Like we don't want to hoard this technology for ourselves. Um, and so as these new innovations come forth, we'll do the best we can to make them available on Pivotal Pleb's website. I think the next big unlock for us is our own control board. That one
Okay.
requires a significant more development than the Loki and Njord boards, and so that one's probably won't be released for a while. But we want to go and develop a control board that is feasible or is designed for micro mining, right? If you look at the current
Hmm.
control boards, they're 70 to $150 a piece. They've got a way more technology packed into them than they need. You still need an Ethernet cable. Like we can design a control board that's only has to manage one hash board and
Simplify that.
has
Yeah.
simplify it a lot, and then put modern technology in it where we're running from a Wi-Fi radio instead of Ethernet. We've got an IoT connection there or a cellular connection there and GPS. Like so we want to design our own custom control board that is appropriate for micro mining. And that one, we would hope to make that available on Pivotal Pleb. I think that's a really big important unlock. Um, Sorry, I'm forgetting the other part. There were two parts to your question.
Oh, well, that was the what were the any other interim products like that? Like what other things might we see on Pivotal Pleb?
Oh, and I think the other
And
one was how do people get involved or
yes,
was
yeah.
yeah.
Where to direct people, and I mean, are y'all gonna do a funding like an investment round for this at some point? I mean, I'm sure that's a little bit down the road, maybe, but um,
Yeah, I think so on the funding side of things, at my time at Owlet, we raised $250 million over the course of 9 years
mhm,
prior to going public in, I think, 6 different rounds. I've been down the fundraising route. I know what it's like to fundraise. While we could not have done what we did at Owlet without fundraising and the support of good investors, um, I would say that there are certain aspects and elements of fundraising that I'd prefer to try to avoid on this round. That
yeah.
being said, we are so we're bootstrapping the company right now,
I was about to
and we're
say,
not.
y'all just investing your own capital.
Yep, investing on capital bootstrapping. We're not in any
True
rush to.
pleb, true pleb.
we're not in any rush to take on capital, but if we find the right partners that say, hey, we love what you're doing, and let's take it and scale it, let's blow it up and accelerate, really, right? That would be the main reason for us, is to accelerate this vision. But like I said, we're not in a rush. But if we find the right partners that have the same ethos and same mentality, we're open to it. As far as like how people can help and get involved, I think so. This first year for us is going to be all about learning. We will be distributing to a few other network owners, people that want to build their own networks, but we, like I said, we need to nail it before we try to scale it, and so we're got to go and prove it out ourselves this first year, and then coming the next year, like we want to be able to go and just franchise, for the lack of a better word, start getting this out to as many network owners and operators as possible, and so really the big thing is like, pick up a Loki board, pick up this technology and start playing around with these ideas of building these micro miners for micro hosts. And if you can't wait until next year, like go pick that up and just start hashing out your own house. And then next year, like we're really stoked to be able to I guess as you talked about, you have people that reaching out to you all the time saying, hey, how do I get involved? How do I contribute? We're stoked to potentially have an option for people to, with very minimal capital, and again, something that is maybe doesn't require them to quit their fiat job right out of the gate, but allows them to moonlight or build out on weekends, yet still contribute in a meaningful way to hyper decentralization and in an economically rewarding way. So I think, how do people get involved? Well, let's go start building all these different networks. Let's get as many pleb miners and passionate Bitcoiners involved in building out their own networks and operating their own networks as possible.
Oh yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, I think we covered the most of it, and we'll probably have you back on, kind of, let the learning year unfold, and then we'll see where things have changed, where some of the unknown unknowns have popped up, and what the solutions might be. But I'm 100% going to keep an eye on this, and if you like. I know we've already talked about this, but if you need somebody testing, I mean, that is practically what I do with all the things. Like I love to tinker, and this is such a cool project to me. I mean, honest to God, I think this is arguably one of the most important conversations of like an explicit plan moving forward that could do more for Bitcoin if it succeeds than almost anything. Like there's a lot of potential, and I don't say that lightly either. Nostr is an amazing project, and I think we discount like layers on top of Bitcoin. Like if we solve the network problems around Bitcoin, how much it actually helps privacy and things that are in Bitcoin that actually aren't inherent to it. It's actually an internet communication problem or a DNS problem. And then the same thing with hole punch. Like there's so many different ways of thinking about the improving Bitcoin and making this thing fundamentally sound indefinitely going forward. But I still think that even with all the little attacks at the problem, there's not been kind of a boots on the ground, how do we get hash power distributed sort of solution yet. And this sounds like it can work. This just sounds really, really promising. So I'm stoked, and I'm glad that you have joined us in the Bitcoin space, and that you are taking this on. So any way that I can help, I'm more than happy to do so.
I really appreciate it, and that means a ton coming from you, Guy, to hear that feedback. I'm stoked to be here. So stoked to be a part of this peaceful revolution, and can't wait to actually start distributing this hash and having this vision come to life.
Sweet. All right, man. Dude, thanks for coming on.
Yep. Thanks, Guy.